We're pleased today to have Tom Casady with us. He's the Director of Public Safety for Lincoln. Mr. Casady is one of our graduates. He earned an undergrad degree in criminal justice in the last century, right?
Thanks.
He went on to earn a master's in poli-sci, also from the University of Nebraska. He began his work in law enforcement as an officer in the Lincoln Police Department in 1974, and he shifted over to the Lancaster County Sheriff's Department for several years, serving as the county sheriff for 4 years. He then returned to the Lincoln Police Department in 1994 as the chief of police, and he served in that capacity for 17 years, and that's a long tenure for a chief. He was appointed to the current position as Director of Public Safety for Lincoln in 2011. And in that capacity, he oversees the Lincoln Police Department, of course, but also the Lincoln Fire and Rescue Department. These two agencies employ over 700 people and have a combined budget in excess of $60 million. Last I looked, might be more than that now. Mr. Casady.
It was 43 years ago, I guess, this year that I changed my major during my senior year from English to criminal justice, and I did it for one of the reasons that drives an awful lot of decisions, money. There was a tuition reimbursement program available from the federal government for people that were police officers, and I got talked into joining the Lincoln Police Department with the intention of just fulfilling my 2-year obligation that went along with the free tuition. And then I expected to go on and do something else with the rest of my life. I always thought that I was headed to law school. But what happened to me is I really enjoyed my newfound career. And by the time I was done groveling at the public trough, which was quite a while because I decided this is such a good deal I should go to grad school too. And by the time that was all done, I was a few years down the road and like most people, had all those life commitments of mortgages and marriages and children. And more than anything, just an occupational field and a career that was challenging and fun. And I really accidentally discovered my life's work. These past several years as public safety director, my focus has been quite a bit different. Although my heart is still in policing. And just before I came here, for the first time in a long time, I actually had to open a case, close out a dispatch record, write a police report, and tag in some physical evidence. And I did it with a minimal amount of help from real cops, so I was pretty proud of that little minor accomplishment. This would kind of be the equivalent of one of the vice chancellors teaching an undergraduate course today. But I still love it. I still love what I do. I still love coming to work every day. I can't hang it up at the end of the day. I'm a very early riser, and after I get done with my bike ride every morning, I'm always doing some kind of police work, usually just reading reports and getting informed about what's gone on overnight, at 5 a.m. But it's been an incredibly challenging, rewarding, and interesting career. I'm 64 now. I started at the police department when I was 20. They didn't know it until after they had hired me that I wasn't legal yet. But I'm probably on the tail end of my life in public safety right now. One of the benefits of having been in this field for 43 years, though, is a lot of perspective. I've seen a lot of things come and go. I know a lot of stuff that you only pick up when you've been doing it for a long, long time. And that makes me a pretty good resource if you ever have a hotly contested game of Trivial Pursuit and you need someone with American history or world geography. As long as I don't have to answer anything that deals with popular culture or especially country western music. I thought that I might tell you a little bit today about what I think some of the key issues are in policing right now and on the national level, and maybe inject from time to time a little bit about what's going on locally on those same issues. And when I'm wrapped up with that, answer any questions or discuss any other topics that you have. I'm an extemporaneous speaker, so I generally do not have prepared remarks. But just to show you how much I've been looking forward to today's presentation, I actually prepared notes. That's it, one Post-it note. And I can't read it without my reading glasses. So if I have to revert to those at some point, you'll know that I'm running out of material. But what I really want to do is talk to you about what some of those key issues are. And I want to start off with police misconduct, which is certainly one of the key issues that dominates my field, policing, today. And it probably started a few years ago in the wake of Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore riots. But it's become a huge issue in every state in the United States, even here in Lincoln. Now, there's nothing new about police misconduct. I come at this from the perspective of having worked with literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of police officers. My employee number is 304. We're now hiring employees who are in the 1,800 range. So I've worked with about 1,500 Lincoln Police Department employees alone, not to mention other departments and other people that I've known. And my experience has been that about 99% of them are mighty fine people. People I would trust my life with, people that I would trust with my most intimate secrets and personal problems if the need arose. But you know what? 1% of 1,500, okay, you can do the math on this, is still 15. There's still some bad people that I have worked with and known and seen in my field. In the United States, we don't know how many police officers there are, but I think 800,000 would be a pretty good estimate. You'll see that number, 700, 800, 1 million thrown around, and it kind of depends on whether you're including people like ATF agents and conservation officers at the Nebraska Department of Parks Commission. But basically about 800,000 police officers in the United States. And if that same thing holds true, that 99% of them are good folk, there's 8,000 bad ones, right? If I've got my decimal points correct, I think that would be right. And there's nothing new about this. Actually, I think when you look at police officers, my experience has been that as an occupational group, they're about as sterling as any occupational group I can think of. All right, so police misconduct is certainly an issue. It's a small issue compared to the overall volume of police officers and police-citizen contacts that happen. And frankly, it's probably much less of a problem in the field of policing than it is in other fields. So I want you to think about it. I want you to think about the bad act that we've become aware of in other occupational fields. How about medicine? How about higher education? How about presidents of the United States? Let's see, we're on 45 now. That's what we've had since the Republic was founded. And during my lifetime, 2 of those presidents, Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton, have committed grave acts that led to their impeachment. Neither of them was convicted in the Senate, where Richard Nixon resigned and Bill Clinton wasn't found guilty of the articles of impeachment. But nonetheless, I think any reasonable person would look at the acts of those 2 presidents of the United States and be pretty appalled to think that they lied, to think that a president of the United States had a sexual relationship with a 20-year-old intern in the Oval Office and lied about it, or Richard Nixon covered up a burglary committed by people working on his behalf and knew about it and used the power of his office to try to conceal that and lie about it. Pretty grave misdeeds. And if you do the percentages on that, 2 divided by 45, That's a lot more than 1%. How about religion? How about organized religion? How about the clergy? Same thing. So you look at any occupational field, whether it's UNL faculty or Lincoln police officers or presidents of the United States, and you've got good evidence of the fundamental fact that human beings are flawed and that there are bad people in any kind of occupational field. And one other truth in life, that even good people sometimes do bad things, and some of those things are very, very bad. Now, the reason I think that it's probably less of a problem in policing than it is in most fields is because of the extensive work police departments generally do in the United States to try to prevent people that have tendencies towards misconduct from entering the field. I taught here at UNL for 12 years. First as a graduate teaching assistant, and after that as an adjunct instructor in 3 different departments. Not one time during that 12 years, and I think I had at least one class every semester. Not one time during that 12-year period did I have anyone from the full-time faculty or the department chair or the vice chair come into my classroom to see if I was even there, much less whether I was doing a decent job. Not one time did anyone counsel me and say, "Tom, I think the materials you're using for this class need to be improved. Some of those are getting a little bit dated." Never, ever happened. So it's another example of an occupational field where people really do operate largely independently, largely without any day-to-day supervision, largely without much in the way of oversight. At the end of the semester, you can fill out an evaluation on me if you're inclined to do so, but that was about it. That was about the sum total of accountability. It's a little bit better in policing, and unlike Tom Casady, the instructor of Criminal Justice 203, Tom Casady, the police officer, took a polygraph exam to get this job. A lie detector test. Had a background investigation done. Had his employers and his neighbors interviewed. And today, although I didn't have one at the time, today you'd also have a psychological examination by a clinical psychologist. So there's a lot of work done to try to hire the right kind of people in law enforcement that does not apply to candidates for political office or university faculty or pastors or Uber drivers. And as a result, I think that on balance, we've probably got a workforce that's more honest, more trustworthy, more legitimate than most any other workforce that I can think of off the top of my head. But nothing's perfect, and as I said, there's always that very small percentage of bad actors who make it into the field, or people that weren't bad actors that become bad actors. And we are seeing lots of examples of this from all over the United States these days. I think we're seeing those examples not because it's happening more often, but because we're simply much more aware of it today than we were a generation ago. The 24-hour news cycle did not exist when I was a rookie. The paper published twice a day. They had a deadline for their stories, and that was it. And the television news was pretty much a regurgitation of what was in yesterday's newspaper. That's changed just hugely. The traditional media has changed hugely. The emergence of the internet in the past 20 years as a communications mechanism for people to get their news, and more recently, the emergence and just the transcendence of social media has changed things dramatically. And as a result, we know a lot more about North Koreans firing missiles and a malfunctioning police officer in Tacoma, Washington today than we would have known a generation ago. And as a result, I think it makes it seem like there's a great deal more police misconduct or a great deal more clergy misconduct or a great deal more sexual harassment going on in workplaces around the country, when in fact what we're really seeing is just the results of having a great deal more information at our disposal each and every minute, not only each and every day. Now, here's the problem. Although misconduct and bad acting is a problem in every single human enterprise ever invented throughout the history of mankind, police officers are somewhat different than members of the clergy or the faculty or Uber drivers because we give them guns and we give them powers to exert that are very onerous responsibilities. The power to arrest, the power to use force, the power to deprive someone from their freedom. These are incredibly important powers that are delegated by society to police officers. And when that trust is broken, the results are much different than they are in most other occupational fields. There are a few others that I can think of where the results are also pretty darn significant. But in policing, you certainly have a lot of men and women who wield a great deal of discretionary power, and when they are involved in some kind of misuse of that power or misconduct, the consequences are dire. And as a result, I think it's incumbent upon us to have special safeguards against misconduct by people in positions of power and authority over others. Police officers work independently. Most of what a police officer does in the United States is subject to only minimal supervision and review. They are, in large part, exercising discretion outside the view of the public or of supervisors. In some ways, their work is visible only to the officer and the citizen with whom he or she interacts. That also raises the stakes a little bit. A police officer can get away with a lot of things that Donald Trump cannot get away with. And as a result, I think it's entirely appropriate for us to expect and demand great control over police misconduct that we might not demand in other occupational fields. This has been a problem here in Lincoln. I had to remind my management staff a couple of weeks ago of all the bad deeds I've seen done by my colleagues during my career, and they are many. Now, they represent, as I said, a tiny, tiny fraction. But nonetheless, I've seen police officers here in Lincoln commit serious crimes, homicide, burglary, sexual assault, drug dealing. We've had police officers here in Lincoln that have been charged with, convicted of serious crimes, sent to prison. It's a very small handful, but it's still there. And that's only the serious misconduct that we know about. And I've seen police officers do incredibly bad things, make plenty of mistakes, but also do incredibly bad things. A tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the total interactions, however. So it's important for police departments to have mechanisms in place to minimize the chance of misconduct occurring, to maximize the chance that it's uncovered, and then to deal with it well when it is uncovered and confirmed. So good accountability systems. And I think Lincoln does a particularly good job of that. We have good accountability systems here. Nationally, however, I think it's a mixed bag. I think the police accountability in the United States needs some pretty fundamental improvements. One of the things that concerns me a great deal going on in the country right now is the phenomenon of labor agreements that require arbitration. So arbitration is a process whereby a labor dispute gets submitted to an allegedly neutral third party who makes a determination, and the two parties to the disagreement are bound to abide by that determination. And arbitration in labor agreements has become pretty common in the U.S., in parts of the country where police officers are unionized, and that would include here in Lincoln, we're unionized. And I have real problems with arbitration. My experience has been that arbitrators generally are being driven in part by a sense that they must be fair, and fairness is either intentionally or maybe even subconsciously defined as letting management win sometimes and letting the aggrieved employee win sometimes. And as a result of this, I think a lot of cases where police officers are held accountable and serious disciplinary action is taken in the United States are overturned through arbitration rulings. And my feeling has always been that police management in departments in the U.S., if they're doing a decent job, they're not firing anyone unless there's very, very solid evidence that supports that firing. And to have those firings overturned by a third-party arbitrator and officers returned to the job that had committed acts so grave that their chief had decided that they needed to be fired is really troubling to me. And it's happening quite a bit. There's been a bit in the news in the past couple of months about this. I think it was either the New York Times or the Washington Post that did kind of an expose, a series about police officers that had been returned after being fired and being reinstated by arbitrators. We don't have arbitration here in Lincoln as part of our labor agreement, but I think it's probably coming because it is somewhat comparable. Most agencies of our size that are unionized do have arbitration. And in Nebraska, the law says that basically you have to follow comparability. Essentially, you have to do what other departments of similar size and similar complexity are doing. So I think probably we will ultimately have arbitration here in Lincoln. There's been a lot of energy in the United States poured into something called early warning tracking systems in the past decade, EWATs. Early warning tracking systems are an attempt to create databases of employee conduct so that managers in police departments are more likely to spot someone with an emerging behavior problem before it reaches critical mass. I think this is a really good idea, particularly in really large departments. It's probably marginal in its applicability to a department of Lincoln size. Lincoln has 329 police officers. And if the chief here was not already aware of some officer with an emerging behavior problem, I'd be really concerned, database or not. But when departments get a little bit larger, up in the 500, 1,000, 1,500 plus range, I think having some kind of a database that assists in identifying officers that have repeated complaints, repeated use of force, repeated policy violations, I think that's a really good idea. So essentially, I think we need to do a good job as citizens of making sure that our local agencies have good accountability systems. I'm a big believer in civilian control of the police. Lincoln has probably the oldest functioning Citizen Police Advisory Board in the country. Ours was formed in 1975, and it provides another avenue for citizens who feel like they've been aggrieved. Although it was very controversial when it came into being in 1975, and for the first few years, for the past 30 years, it's been completely non-controversial, and I think it's served the community well. But it's fought tooth and nail in some communities around the country, that concept of civilian review, and I think it's fundamental in a democratic society like ours for civilian review boards to exist and to be empowered to investigate complaints against officers and to provide citizens with a mechanism for some kind of review of police behavior and conduct. So that's issue number one, a little bit of the local twist on it. Issue number two is somewhat related to that. And issue number two that I thought I might tell you a little bit about is body-worn cameras. Since Ferguson and Baltimore back in 2013-14, there has been a big move afoot in the United States to get police officers equipped with body-worn cameras. I think in some cases, people have supported this notion with the mistaken belief that it was the solution to police misconduct, that if you put a camera on every police officer, that you would somehow prevent officers from misbehaving. Police officers, generally speaking, are very supportive of body-worn cameras. They want them, they're clamoring for them because they view it just the reverse. If I had a camera, if everything I did and said was recorded during the course of the day, people would realize what a knight in shining armor I really am, and I could avoid the insults and hassles of these unfounded complaints that occasionally are made about my performance. So it seems to have broad support. Lots of departments around the country are implementing body-worn cameras in one form or another. Some departments, some pretty sizable departments, are equipping all of their officers with body-worn cameras. Denver comes immediately to mind as one that's been in the news lately, equipping all of its officers with body-worn cameras. We have a handful of body-worn cameras here in Lincoln that we've had for about a decade now, and we're slowly going to increase that number. We're going to increase it slowly, primarily, well, I guess the primary reason is cost. The secondary reason is the concerns of me, the public safety director, that the technology is going to be leapfrogged by something else, and the desire not to have too much money invested in it, so that we're not throwing money down the drain. I'm of the belief that body-worn cameras are not going to fulfill their desired mission. You've seen plenty of video from body-worn cameras on the news or on the internet, and you've probably noticed the same thing I have, that a lot of times it's not very good. You know, police work takes place in the dark. Police work takes place when people are moving. Critical incidents often involve struggles, fights, running, loud noises, flashing lights, moving limbs. All of these things make that body-worn video of fairly poor quality on balance. Now, in among those videos, every now and then there's a gem, however, one that captures something that's very, very high quality, or at least dispositive on the case. It's just not very often that that's the case. More often than not, the video, shows an arm and a lot of motion, and it's sort of like watching this will date me, the Blair Witch Project for the first time. So I think body-worn video has been, to some extent, oversold, and it's an expensive technology. Cameras are cheap. The real cost in body-worn cameras is the cost of managing the video and storing the video. And you're talking about lots and lots and lots and lots of video. So terabytes upon terabytes upon terabytes of video storage. And then managing that video, redacting the video, extracting the video, responding to discovery motions, responding to evidentiary requests, responding to FOIA's, Freedom of Information Act requests for video. All of this requires resources, and the resources that it primarily requires are personnel, and to a lesser extent just the cost of usually cloud-based storage. Most departments that are doing online or doing body-worn cameras are using cloud-based storage solutions that are quite expensive. So here in Lincoln, first year cost equipping all of our officers with body-worn video probably in the neighborhood of $750,000, and somewhere in the range of $250,000 plus every year in perpetuity thereafter to store and manage that video. So that's a lot of money. That's a library, basically. That's the cost of running one of our libraries. So, think about this in your mind. Is spending that $750,000 first year and $250,000 every year thereafter, is that worth closing down the community library at 27th and South Street, for example? Because that's, in municipal government, that's basically what it comes down to. You know, if you're going to increase expenditures over here, where are you going to decrease them? For something that's entirely new. And if you haven't noticed this lately, I certainly have, there doesn't seem to be anyone running for public office these days on a platform of, I'm going to increase your taxes to provide better services. In fact, everyone that I see running for public office these days seems to be saying, I'm going to improve your public services and cut your taxes at the same time. Well, after 43 years in municipal government, I can assure you that doesn't work. You know, the waste, fraud, and abuse was all ferreted out years ago. And we already achieved the huge savings that came from buying printers that would print on both sides of a page long, long ago. And we're not going to find, you know, $750,000 this year in the couch cushions. So really the reality is that if you're going to take on new expenses, something gives elsewhere, something that could have been done with that same amount of money. And unfortunately, it seems to be these days the low-hanging fruit, the things that seem to fall off the end of the truck are things like community learning centers, libraries, parks maintenance. You know, public safety has been held pretty much harmless here in Lincoln and most parts of the United States, whereas a lot of our human services of other kinds have taken some pretty deep cuts, including here in Lincoln. So I'm not really jazzed about spending that $750,000 and $250,000 every year thereafter on body-worn cameras, because I just don't think that it solves the fundamental problem that we're trying to get at. It's not that I have anything against the technology. And we're under some pressure here. The chief is under pressure. And the pressure is not coming from the community. It's not external pressure. It's internal. It's our police officers saying, what is going on? You know, we're the 71st largest city in the United States, and we don't have body-worn cameras. We need body-worn cameras. Body-worn cameras will protect us. And that's where the pressure that Chief Blymeister is under is coming from. It's coming from that internal desire to have body-worn video. I mentioned that I think the technology may be leapfrogged. There are examples of this you know, throughout my career where a technology that looked very promising got leapfrogged. A really good one is another form of video. And it's 8mm video cassettes on small cassette recorders in police cruisers that were the rage in the mid-1980s through the late 1990s. In-car video systems. And lots of departments invested huge amounts of money. Lots of federal dollars were pushed into in-car video systems. And the technology got leapfrogged. They crapped out. Omaha was a good example of this. They equipped all of their patrol cars largely with donated money and grants with in-car video systems, but they never thought about the need to maintain those video systems long-term and the need to replace them every few years. You know, how long does a video camera last? Well, we're not talking about the video camera on your smartphone. We're talking about a video camera that had moving parts. You know, things that had to move. And those cameras probably had a lifespan of about 3 years before they had just crapped out and needed to be replaced. Omaha never planned for that. They never planned for maintenance, never planned for how to manage all the video cassette tapes that they were going to accumulate. And as a result, after about 3 years, less than half of their cameras were in operating condition. And lots of departments around the country made the same mistake, and the technology got leapfrogged by digital video. So, you know, all video systems in police cruisers in the United States today are digital systems, solving the problem of moving parts and temperature control and lots of other issues that accompanied the old technology. And I'm a little bit worried that the same thing may happen with body-worn cameras. It's still a relatively new technology. The camera systems are still largely cabbaged together from consumer products. They're really not very good. Very few of them are kind of suitable for the police environment. Storage is very expensive. in a few years, the same amount of storage will be very cheap. So I'm a little bit worried that investing a lot of money in body-worn cameras is setting us up to spend a lot of money that we'll regret in a few years, because the technology will have matured, improved, and maybe even been replaced by something else entirely. If you really want to hold the police accountable, if you really want to protect a police officer from a false charge of misconduct, there's a far better view than a body-worn camera. And the view is a neutral, objective third party holding a cell phone at a distance to tell the truth. It gives you a much better view of what's going on. And an even better view, a micro drone hovering over my left shoulder, about 17 feet up in the air. So I'm a little bit concerned that maybe we will come up with solutions for providing this kind of dispositive evidence that make the body-worn camera systems of today look pretty rudimentary by comparison. This same thing, as I said, has happened with digital auto recording and in-car camera systems during my career. So I think that's something that may happen. Police use of force is the next issue I want to talk about. There is a huge move in policing at my level in the United States today to make some fundamental change in the way police officers are trained in use of force. And the fundamental change is really to incorporate de-escalation into police use of force techniques and decision-making and training. De-escalation means doing things that make it less likely that force will be used. For most of my career, the ultimate test on use of force was the force justified? And today, the real question the police managers are asking themselves is, was it necessary? So it's one thing for force to be legally justified. It's another thing for force to be necessary. There may be a little bit of overlap there, but they're not the same thing entirely. And a lot more emphasis is being placed today on teaching police officers techniques to make the chance that physical force might be used less necessary rather than what the training has been to this point, which is basically legally justified. So I worked with a very fine police. I'll tell you two quick stories about very fine police officers I worked with. One of them was Larry. Larry was recently retired, one of the smartest people I ever knew. I was assigned with Larry. I would have been a 21-year-old at the time, and I was assigned to work with him one night when his regular partner was off duty. And we stopped a guy named Bill Reed that I knew. And I knew him from my civilian life before I was a police officer, when I used to work in a little neighborhood grocery store. And Bill Reed had a real temper and a drinking problem, and I dealt with him as a customer clerk. And he was a scary guy. He was a big guy with a big head of red hair and a bad temper to go with it. And I was a little guy with a little head of red hair and a bad temper. But at any rate, we stopped Bill Reed one night, and Bill got out of his car before we could even get out of our cruiser. And he stormed back towards the patrol car as Larry got out of the driver's seat and I got out of the passenger seat. And I was shaking and had the door open and, worried that Bill Reed was going to take us both apart. And he reached in his pocket and he pulled out his driver's license and he was like, I can't believe you stopped me. He was just mouthing off something fierce to Larry Barksdale, and he handed him his driver's license. And Larry handed it back to him and said, wasn't that big of a deal? And walked back to the cruiser. And it was so disarming that Bill Reed, this violent-tempered guy that I knew as a 15-year-old grocery sacker, he followed him back saying, I'm sorry, apologizing. And demanding that Larry give him the ticket that he deserved. And Larry just kept saying, it wasn't that big of a deal. I was just going to warn you about it anyway. And we drove off, leaving Bill Reed standing there with all that emotion worked up and nothing to do with it. And I thought, wow, that was pretty cool. And then I worked with another officer several years later when I was a young sergeant in the late 1970s, Steve. And Steve had a phrase that he would use to his coworkers, including me, when he saw someone getting kind of ready to fight. And by getting ready to fight, I'm not talking about the Bill Reeds of the world. I'm talking about the Tom Casadys of the world. When he saw that things were about to go south, he'd say something. He'd turn to his coworker and say something like, "Let's not get our uniform mussed." You know? I mean, he would diffuse fellow officers who he sensed were getting a little bit tense. If he sensed, we're about to go hands-on with this person, and he'd do it by saying something as disarming as, let's not get our uniform mussed. And I saw Steve do this time and time again. Steve and I were dispatched one day to 2272 Y Street, where a family of frequent flyers lived, Victor and Evelyn, husband and wife. Evelyn had called, Victor had been drinking. She knew where things were going to go as the night unfolded, that Victor would get more and more disagreeable. And as a stopgap measure, she decided, I'll call the police before he gets really disagreeable. He's got an arrest warrant. They'll take him to jail, and the night will be peaceful. So she made a surreptitious telephone call to the police station and said, Victor's here, he has an arrest warrant. And Steve and I were sent to the home to arrest Victor. And we walked into the living room, and Victor and Evelyn were watching All in the Family, a popular sitcom in the 1970s. And we told Victor, he's got an arrest warrant, we're going to have to take you in, Victor. And he said, not until I finish watching this. And Steve went like this and said, okay. And Evelyn said, would you two like some ice cream? They were having ice cream. And Steve said, sure. And we sat there for about 10 minutes while All in the Family finished and had a small bowl of butter brickle. And then Victor got up and turned around and let us handcuff him and took him off to jail. And I thought, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. This is de-escalation. Now, these are kind of extreme examples. But today, we're doing a better job in the United States. We still have room for improvement of teaching police officers how to de-escalate tense situations so that the chance that force is necessary is reduced. And there are ways you can do that without putting people at risk, without creating more risk. And some of it's pretty darn basic stuff. Very, very basic. I was at the range earlier this month. It is still November, yeah. And Jeff Blymeister, the police chief, and I were both doing our annual qualification. We had waited until late in the year. And the clock was ticking, and we took advantage of one Friday when the weather was decent to go out to the range to get our qualification in on one of the qualification dates. And Jeff's 20 years younger than me. He's in his mid-40s, I'm 64. And the drill is, the range master gives you the instructions for the qualification course, and you're standing here at the 7-yard line. Draw and fire 2 rounds, one on the right, one on the left. Reload, fire 2 more rounds, one on the right, one on the left. That was the instructions for one of the stages or whatever. And I've been doing this for 43 years. Whistle blows, psst, bang, 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 bang. Jeff, on the other hand, is standing right next to me. And I'm wearing ear muffs, but I can still hear a little bit. And Jeff is going, drop it, bang, bang, drop it, bang, bang. He's talking to the target. He's given the target verbal instructions, and he's moving like this. I'm standing here shooting this stupid target. Jeff is moving to make himself less of a target, and he's talking to the target because that's the way he's been trained. He's been trained to move, seek cover, try to get the bad guy to quit what he's doing. Just a fundamental difference in a real little thing. And it was kind of a reminder to me that you perform on the street as you've been trained. And it was a good, simple little indication of how changes in training can result in changes in behavior. A lot more emphasis is being given to de-escalation. A lot more needs to be given. Because there are just too many use of force incidents that, while legally justified, there would have been other alternatives that might have been effective in reducing the amount of force used or the need for force altogether without jeopardizing anyone's safety. In other words, they're kind of a zero-sum game. It would have worked just as well, or could have worked just as well if we had given it a chance. Couple more issues real quickly. Budget. Huge issue here locally, a little bit of an issue nationally. Municipal governments and state governments in the United States have been under an awful lot of pressure since 2008 and still are. And here in Lincoln in particular, we just haven't had the funding to increase the size of the police force in relation to the population. So Lincoln's a very small police department per capita. We're definitely down in the bottom 10% of cities in the United States. We're the smallest per capita in Nebraska by a pretty considerable margin. Very, very small force. We need to be adding about 4.5 officers per year just to tread water, keep pace with our population growth rate. We're coming nowhere close to that. And as a result, our size has been falling and falling pretty significantly in relation to population since the late 1990s. 1999 was our peak year. We hit 1.37 per thousand population. This year we're at 1.17. There is no magic size for a police department. A police department needs to be large enough to provide the services that citizens expect and the way they expect them to be provided. And I think LPD is doing a pretty good job of meeting that standard right now, but it's getting progressively a little bit more challenging every single year. As a practical matter, what it means here in Lincoln more than anything is slower response to low priority calls. And a simple traffic crash is a fairly low priority call in the big scheme of things. But if you've been waiting 45 minutes for the police officers to show up at 11th and B Street where you've had a right angle collision with an uninsured suspended driver, it seems like forever to you. And I think we're increasingly having problems meeting some of those expectations. And again, I don't see it changing very much because of the aforementioned phenomenon that no one's running for office on a platform of I'm going to increase your taxes to provide better services. Recruitment and retention, something of an issue nationwide. What we're going through right now in policing reminds me of what we were going through at the time I was hired. And frankly, when I was hired in 1974, we were somewhat desperate. The turnover rate was very great. And it was not a particularly attractive career field. We've been on a downtrend the past 4 or 5 years in numbers of applicants, and particularly numbers of qualified applicants. And I think some of that is because policing just isn't quite as attractive as a career field today as it was back in the 1990s and the early part of the 2000s. Bad publicity, bad events nationally affect our ability to recruit. A low unemployment rate is a big factor, and we've got a very low unemployment rate here. So LPD is getting plenty of applicants. They're still not getting quite enough what I would call highly qualified applicants. And a real depressing trend to see has been the number of applicants that would be pretty darn well qualified were it not for something that they have done that they weren't thinking about when they were younger, that has suddenly made them disqualified. Domestic violence, felony-level drug use would probably be the two most prevalent things that I see. Repeated alcohol abuse. It's depressing to see a 22-year-old that looks great on paper that's got, at the age of 22, 2 DWI convictions. And I think, gee, you've just shot yourself in the foot for a lot of opportunities that might otherwise have came your way. And that's a problem everyone's dealing with. Another problem that departments are dealing with, including Lincoln, revolves around that phrase that you've probably seen on a commercial before, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? Wrong. That's not true. What happens in Vegas now lives on forever on the internet and will come back to bite you in the butt when you're 32 and trying to get appointed as the county court judge in Corvallis, Oregon. It really will. And there are a lot of people that when we do our vetting of applicants, we find out, whoa, no way we can hire this person that's been saying or doing these things that he or she has been posting on a social media site. So we understand that even good people do bad things. I always considered when I was chief and making the final decision, frequency, recency, severity. I knew my own misdeeds. I know the normal range of bad things that people do. I know the difference between someone who's a good person that's done some bad things and someone who's a bad person. I know that. But increasingly, we're getting people that basically have disqualified themselves with things that we can't do anything about. And domestic violence conviction is a good example of that. It prohibits you from possessing a firearm. So I have a number of other issues on my post-it note, but I'd really like to hear from you and talk about any issues or answer any questions that you'd like to pose. Come on.
I got a mic here. As you're thinking, I'll ask one. You mentioned drones. What do you see as the future application of the drone technology in law enforcement?
Mm-hmm. We have a drone. We have been authorized to use it once. Mayor Beitler has required his written authorization for the police department to use a drone. And we've requested that once and received permission once, and it was on a natural gas explosion that may be a criminal event that happened in Southeast Lincoln that destroyed a home and actually destroyed 2 homes and damaged about 40 others. And we used it to get some aerial photography that helped us with that investigation. I think there are events all the time where a drone would be useful. And I think as this technology matures, they'll be pretty commonplace for use by law enforcement in the future, basically to provide situational awareness and a view over the horizon that you can't get from a fixed position on the ground. Searches for missing persons, barricaded suspects. I got a team of people down in Wilbur right now searching for our missing person, Sidney Loof, and to be able to run a drone down that drainage instead of people trying to make their way down there on foot, much quicker, much more efficient, better viewpoint. We had a chase with a bank robber who ditched his car in a big field in a saline wetland in North Lincoln. We had a huge number of people out there trying to corral this guy and search for him. If we'd had a drone, we could have taken that drone over and flown it over his position and vectored everyone in, just said, he's right underneath the drone. But as it was, we were flying around in a fixed-wing aircraft, and the observer in the aircraft was trying to describe on this rather featureless terrain near 27th and Interstate 80 where the bad guy was. They could see him from the air, but it was so featureless it was very difficult to describe to the people on the ground where he was. And they're circling in a fixed-wing aircraft, saying, no, go left. No, the other left. No, our left. It was funny listening to it on the radio. And all I could think of is, boy, if we had a drone, we'd just fly it over there and say, he's right underneath the drone. So I think they've got lots of applications in search, situational awareness, barricaded suspects. Those would be the main places. And of course, the risk of drone, another thing on my list, by the way, a lot of concern about privacy. The ability of the police to gather information about you and to find out what you're doing has never, ever been greater. And it's increasing exponentially. And the police are a small part of the big pie, to tell the truth. Info USA knows more about you than the police will ever know. That junk mail that you get is different than the junk mail that I get because of how much information Info USA knows about me, my spending habits, my preferred hotels, my favorite pizza toppings, the kinds of vehicles I like to drive and rent, the hotels I like to stay in. And all that junk mail is targeted at me specifically. So I get a lot of Rogaine email. Coping with technology was another item on my list, by the way, and the explosion of technology has created a lot of new challenges for law enforcement agencies. And Lincoln was a very, very early adopter of information technology, and we're now dealing with technology that's coming to the end of its life cycle and needs to be replaced, and it's going to be a big challenge in the next few years for us. Other questions, other issues you'd like me to weigh in on?
I know some of you, I recognize we've talked about law enforcement career. Any advice that T could give you? You got the top guy right here.
Don't do anything that would disqualify you. That's one important piece of advice. Get as much education as you can afford and do it full time for as long as you can afford to do it. If I had life to live over again, I wish I had not gone to work for the police department during my senior year, because it took me 2 years after that to finish up 20 credit hours. And 4 years to finish a master's degree. And I think anyone that can afford to do it ought to get as much education as they can before they're in the full-time workforce. And my opinion has always been that it doesn't matter, the field doesn't matter much. I've always advised people that ask me, study what interests you and what you find tolerable. And I'm not of the opinion, although I'm a Lifetime Achievement Award winner from the College of Criminology and Criminal Justice, the fact of the matter is, I don't think a criminal justice degree equips you any better than any other liberal arts degree to be a police officer. And some of the best police officers, very best police officer I ever worked with was a young woman named Vicki Berg. She died a few years ago in her early 40s of cancer. And Vicki had a degree from Western Missouri in restaurant administration. And she was the finest police officer I ever worked with. And it wasn't her degree that made her a fine police officer, So I'm not a big believer in picking a... awful lot of people, I was just talking to a reporter earlier today about the number of people that are getting journalism degrees when his newsroom is basically abandoned today. He said we could put in a bowling alley and a racquetball court and they have plenty of room in the newsroom to spare. And yet we're cranking out journalism majors all the time. And I have 2 kids that are both journalism majors, right? Neither of whom is a journalist, but they got good, well-rounded educations in a field that they enjoyed. And that's, my advice. I can't think of very many things. When I look back on it, I lucked into a career field where I got to do things that very few people get to do, and think, my daughter and my son-in-law love coming to Lincoln to go on bike rides with me, because I can narrate around the city as we ride about things that have happened here and things that have happened there. And, see that house? And I think sometimes, I look back on my career, the things I've been able to do, and the experiences I've had, the difference I've made in people's lives, pretty darn phenomenal and pretty darn fulfilling. Can't imagine it ever coming to an end. And I know lots of people, who get up and hate going to work every day, can't stand what they do. The only reason they work is to exist, pay the bills. And I can't imagine doing a job like that. And the only other thing I could ever picture myself doing where I have that sense of feeling intrinsic reward and accomplishment is teaching, which is really the only thing I've ever been passionate about professionally. So if you happen to be a CJ major and you're headed towards, a career in criminal justice, particularly in policing, you're lucky to be entering a field where you have that opportunity. You have it pretty much every day. And if you got a younger brother or sister who's 16, 17, 18, and at that stage in life where they're wondering what to do with the rest of their life, if I were advising them, I'd kind of scope out fields like policing and paramedicine wow, if you're a paramedic in the United States today, you can work pretty much anywhere you want, make as much money as you're willing to work overtime hours, and there's a real dearth of paramedics. We're having a hard time recruiting paramedics nationally because there are more jobs open than there are people to fill them. And another one of those jobs like a police officer has, where you really get to save lives, literally. And you're not, stuck behind a desk someplace doing it. Chris, thank you very much for inviting me, and thanks to all of you for
Thank you.
spending some time with me.